Chapter 18 The Mechanical Nightmare. Flashing red lights unadulterated through the halls of Apex headquarters. Staff and facility crews dash about between rooms, shouting at and trying to self-direct each other to the stations. The BA crackled to life, repeating the phrase, "Mechagodzilla's power is at 100%. Repeat, Mechagodzilla's power is at 100%. All personnel, please take your designated station immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." On the main platform overlooking Mechagodzilla's chamber, Siemens stood with an ear-to-ear grin and tapping his foot in anticipation of the awakening of his dream made real. Ren, meanwhile, stood in front of his chair, staring at the computer consoles and monitors. The power had been routed to Mechagodzilla, and now all that left was him to simply take a seat, put on his headgear, and let the mechanical titan rise to show dominance of humanities over the titans. "Just take a seat, and you can prove him wrong," he whispered to himself as he came forward a step. "Just take a seat." Ren's hand touched the back of the chair, and instantly he was taken back almost 30 years, watching a memory of his father taking the exact same action with a young Ren standing next to the chair. "Musuko Sawati Kudasai. My son, sit down, please," a somewhat younger Dr. Sarasawa said calmly. "Kawa. Scary," Ren stated. Ishiro chuckled and knelt down to pick up his son and set him down in the chair while pointing to an image of Gojira on the screen, rising out of the water before the detonation of the Castle Bravo. "Gojira da. That's Gojira," Ishiro whispered, pointing along Godzilla's back and spine. "Titan Desu. He's a titan." "Kowa. Scary," Ren repeated. Ishiro nodded and patted his son's head. "Ha! Kowa desu ne. Daga Shabarashi desu ne." Yes, yes, he is scary, isn't he? But isn't he also amazing?" Little Ren looked at the image and stared at the spot where Godzilla's head sat just beneath the water, and as he tried to reach out to touch the image, he was brought back to the present day and saw he was reaching for the image of Mechagodzilla's head on the main monitor. What? Ren looked around, only to discover he was still alone. "That's right. Nobody's allowed in here except the two of us," he whispered while taking a steady breath to calm his heart. The PA system blared to life in the room. "Mr. Sarisawa, I hope there's no problems." "No problems." "Good. Get in the chair." The PA shut down and Ren forced a breath through his nose as he sat down and donned his headgear. His finger hovered over the execute button and then tapped the mouse. Instantly, his headgear illuminated along with the cables leading to it from the ceiling, and Ren fell into a trance-like state. His field of visions went dark, and then returned slowly as he saw the chamber opening up ahead of him. He looked left, and Mechagodzilla looked left. He looked right, and Mechagodzilla looked right. Ren couldn't help but smile as he looked down and checked his hand. They were large and clawed and spun while he thought about doing so. It was most amusing. Suddenly, he heard a voice in his ears. "Enough playing around, Mr. Sarasawa. It's time to act." Ren looked further left and saw the window to the platform where Simmons stood and gave a nod of his head. Simmons smiled at the response and walked closer to the glass with his eyes shimmering with excitement. Ren turned around and prepared to allow the tunnel leading to the outside world to open, but something stopped him. In Simmons' room, The light went out, and a yellow spark surged through the room. What was that? Simmons demanded. Electrical surge, sir. It fried every circuit in the room. Get us back online. Now, he shouted. The chamber went dark and looked around, while activating a thermal filter so he could see his surroundings. What's this? Rand wondered. Just then, a strange high-pitched warble reverberated throughout the chamber. Or was it just in his head? Did you hear that? Nobody replied. Rand could see the heat signatures for Simmons and the others frantically trying to get the control room back online. They should be able to hear me. Mr. Simmons, can you hear me? No response. They all continued dashing about like ants over a freshly dropped corpse. Strange. The warble returned, louder this time, and Rand looked around, turning in a full circle, trying to see where it came from. Simmons and the others looked on as Mechagodzilla did the rotation, while seeing little more than the glowing light in his eyes and along his body. What's he doing? Simmons asked. Show yourself, Rand demanded. Nothing. Then it hit him. Ghidorah. The warble. It was a perfect match for one of Ghidorah's recorded vocalization, and they had left a perfectly preserved skull connected to a DNA computer. They engineered Mechagodzilla's headgear by studying the trace leftover of a neural connection and used state-of-the-art tech to establish new one to power the DNA computer. I warned him, Rand thought angrily. I warned him nothing good would come from that skull. A yellow surge of electricity shot through Mechagodzilla from head to toe, and Rand was alerted via the onboard computer of a loss of motor function. Rand then suddenly found himself back in the chair with no control over Mechagodzilla. Damn it! Mechagodzilla's arm and head slowly lowered until they were limp, as the mecha stood only by the natural balance of its posture and body shape. No, what's happened? Work on it, sir. As soon as you all fix this mess, you're all fired. Rand fought with the system to regain control, but it was no use. Everything was failing. The login, IDs, and password. The system commands. Nothing was working. Rand's headgear suddenly shut down and the lights leading to the ceiling dimmed. Rand threw the headgear off, just in time to avoid another massive yellow electric surge which completely fried the control console and threw Rand back as the monitor burst. Landing on his back, with a few shards of glass embedded in his flesh, Rand gasped for breath and rolled to his side as he saw tiny trickles of blood beginning to spread through his clothing. Outside, Godzilla and Mothra both stared at the mountain looming over the city. He's here, Godzilla snarled. Back inside the Mechagodzilla's eyes, and the lights along his bodies flickered to life once more while Simmons smiled in relief. Ah, there we go. Excellent work, Mr. Sarasawa. I know we got Mechagodzilla's piercing red eyes shifted towards Simmons and the others, and the titanic mechanical beast lumbered forward and raised a hand into the air. Oh shit! The arm came down and took out the entire control room in a single swipe, with Mechagodzilla emitting a warbling crackle not too dissimilar to a human laugh. Just then, it felt something. It felt like an impact to the back, a pulse of some kind. Outside, Godzilla had begun roaring as loudly as he could, directly towards the mountain as he stomped in its direction. The mechanical nightmare faced the walls in the direction of Godzilla's roar had come, and barreled forward using its red breath laser and claws to tear away at the walls and landscapes. Moments later, the laser broke free of the mountainside, sending tens, if not hundreds of tons of dirt and rock and trees flying into the air and through the city as the morning sun began to rise. One piece of the rubble flew straight at Godzilla, who didn't move an inch as it struck him on the side of the head and bounced off to the streets below. Mechagodzilla tore his way up the mountain, which halted Godzilla in his tracks as he straightened up and his eyes widened. Mothra as well immediately landed on a building rooftop with her wings slumping to either side. The team on board the Heave was also stared slack-jawed as the mechanical devil took a step, shook off the debris sticking to him, and began blasting the immediate area around him with his red mouth laser. What the fuck is that? Ford asked. I have no idea, Joe replied. It's a robot version of Godzilla, Mark said. It's an abomination is what it is, Dr. Chen growled. Mechagodzilla roared at Godzilla, who roared back in response and immediately began jogging towards his new foe through the open streets. Mechagodzilla returned the gesture and began charging Godzilla and taking out all buildings in its path. There, the opening. We need to get in there, Sarasawa yelled while pointing to the opening in the mountain Mechagodzilla left behind. Why? Ford asked. It came out of there. There must be a controller or something in there, right? Joe asked. Sarasawa remained silent. Ah, fuck it. Let's go. The Heave made a beeline for the entrance to the mountain and passed by Godzilla's head as it went. Then Mechagodzilla's. And unless Sarasawa was dreaming, he could swear Mechagodzilla's left eyes followed them for a second before returning its full attention to Godzilla. The two behemoths collided, and a pulse of concussive energy was released, which flattened many of the already weakened buildings around them and pushed Mothra off her perch nearby, forcing her to land on a new one. Godzilla pushed away from Mechagodzilla and spun around as fast as he could with a tail swipe. However, Mechagodzilla used the booster on the shoulders to help it lunge forward as it grabbed the base of Godzilla's tail. Safe from the whip like end, Mechagodzilla pulled Godzilla up and around, causing him to skid across the ground as he went before letting go and watching him slide headfirst into the base of a skyscraper, which promptly fell onto and buried the king of the monsters. Mechagodzilla released another warbling cackle like a laugh as Mothra quietly took wing behind it. Meanwhile, the team managed to make it into the mountains and observe the carnage left behind. Over there, that platform, Sarasawa pointed to where Simmons' observation deck used to be, which was a large slab of metal protruding which seemed a perfect place to land. The Heave landed softly and the makeshift platform then tilted slightly as they started disembarking. Wow! Ford grabbed Joe's wheelchair to prevent him from sliding off and down to the chamber's floor before Mark came to help to push Joe up the incline to a more stable ground. Inside the room, the team saw the rather grisly remain left behind by Mechagodzilla's swipe, but they continued past the debris and to the doors in the back, leading further into the facility. I'm coming, Ran, Serizawa thought. Mechagodzilla suddenly found itself with its head plastered against the side of a building and held down by some strange webbing. Gripping the building and pushing it to try and pull its head free, it ended up demolishing the building itself, which helped the webbing catch the debris and cling to it all in around its face. Shaking in anger, the mechanical titan released its red breath attack and destroyed the rocks hanging in front of its head before using its claws to swipe away the rest. Now cleared of the webs, it turns its attention to it. Splat! It only saw her for a split second, but the vision of Mothra played back in its memory bank as having taken a dive in front of it and unleashed the webbing into its eyes. The lights in its body began glowing more intensely as it tried scraping the webbing away, and By this time, a certain someone had managed to shake free of the debris which buried him, and was now stomping towards the mechanical demon with a deadly intent. Godzilla felt the impact on the side of its head from Godzilla's atomic breath and was thrown off its feet and to the ground. The good news for Mechagodzilla was that it burned away Mothra's webbing, allowing it to see once more. Turning its head and tilting it down, it looked at Godzilla and fired its red breath up into his upper chest and lower back of his neck, resulting in a pain roar from Godzilla, who backpedaled away and turned his body to allow more densely scaled shoulders and side to absorb the blow. Mothra, meanwhile, was on a dive, preparing to web its mouth shut when Mechagodzilla's head suddenly swerved towards her, trailing the beam as it went. Narrowly avoiding it via a barrel roll to the side, Mothra also narrowly missed, crashing into a skyscraper and faltered in her flight path for several seconds, forcing her to gain distance in order to right herself safely. Mechagodzilla made it to its feet and turned to Godzilla in time to see him charging his breath. Mechagodzilla returned the charge and both fired their respective breaths at one another, which collided with a tremendous force and heat, almost immediately melting the buildings directly beneath them and scorching the landscape a deep charcoal gray in a matter of seconds. The beam pushed back and forth on a seemingly even playing field. However, Mechagodzilla's head reared back as the light at the back of its throat shone more brightly before it lurched forward, with the beam gaining density. The red stream of energy began pushing Godzilla's back until it reached the king of the monsters with an explosive result and sent Godzilla flying onto his back in agony. Inside the facility, the team raced through the halls, searching for the control mechanism for Mechagodzilla. Sunside, over here! Dr. Chen called. Sarasawa raced over to her as she knelt down in the open doorway, and as Sarasawa came closer, he came to a halt and was immediately unable to breathe. Ren, he whispered. Ren seemed to be unconscious, but alive, the blood staining his clothing from the glass and metal shards embedded in his skin had Ishiro's heart racing as he knelt down by his son's side and began checking his vital. Everyone, the control mechanism is here, Dr. Chen called to the others who all raced over. Sarazawa, who's this? Dr. Andrews asked. Sarazawa was too engrossed in checking Ren to answer, so Dr. Chen responded that it was his son, and the team went quiet. Can anyone repair that control device? Dr. Chen asked, pointing to where Ren's chair and the control computer and the monitor had been. I can, Ren replied weakly. Ren, Ichiro asked, while gently holding his son's face. So now you come, Ren asked with a frown. Ishiro's eye welled with moisture. I'm sorry. A little too late. A little late for that, don't you think? Ren asked as he struggled to make it to his feet, with Dr. Chen and Ishiro's help. You need help, Ren, Ishiro pleaded. No time. We need to stop Ghidorah. Everyone froze. Ghidorah? Dr. Chen asked. Ren nodded. I heard him when I first connected Mechagodzilla. I could sense him too. His malice and anger, his desire for death and destruction of Gojira. So that thing is, Ford began. Yes, that mecha is Ghidorah, Ren said. Help me to the computer station. I think I can fix this, he groaned. Chapter 19 Finale. Mechagodzilla's head burst through the main body of a building, partially covered in webbing, which had sealed its mouth shut, preventing the use of its breath. Godzilla, standing behind the building, breathed deeply for a moment as Mothra floated nearby. Are you alright? Godzilla huffed forcefully through his nose, and along with the steam spilled a few droplets of blood, which splattered on what was left of the building. Where's Gia? Dr. Andrews screamed. Everyone turned from on the computer, Ren was working on and saw that Gia was indeed missing. Did anyone see her? Andrews cried. No, we were all so focused on. Oh, hey, wait up! Dr. Lin shouted as Andrews took off down the hall. Outside, Godzilla dragged Mechagodzilla by its tail and hoisted it up and around, just like it had done to him before. Letting go a moment later, Mechagodzilla was sent headfirst through a massive collection of urban homes and local businesses before skidding to a halt. Godzilla gave Mothra a growl, and she immediately flew up ahead and began webbing Mechagodzilla from head to toe. Back in Apex headquarters, Chiat had found her way back to the heave, and could just barely see the outline of Kong's hand in the distance behind some of the rubble blocking her view. A moment later, Dr. Andrews and Lin were with her, with the former grabbing her arms and furiously shaking her head before signing, "Never leave me like that again." Chia pointed to Kong and signed, "We need to help him." Dr. Andrews looked out towards where Gia pointed at and managed to spot Kong, shaking her head in frustration. She looked at Gia, who was giving her the saddest eyes she had ever seen on the girl's face before. "What you saying?" Dr. Lin asked. "She wants us to help Kong." "How?" he asked. "I don't know." "Well, we won't know unless we go take a look. Get in the heave. Do you know how to fly it, Nathan?" "I do," came Ford's voice as they both turned around. "Where do you come from?" Dr. Andrews asked. "Dad asked me to go after you two. Figured you'd need the lift. So let's go." Back in the control room, Ren managed to finish rewiring and connecting the computer, which sparked to life and showed his main desktop screen. "Good. Now I just need to start the self-destruct sequences," he said with a nod. "Will that work?" Ishiro asked. "Yeah, that sounds dangerous, but what about the city?" Joe asked. "We learned from Godzilla's nuclear state 5 years ago. The mecha will break down piece by piece until it is no more," Ren replied. "Well, that's a relief," Mark said, with Dr. Chen nodding in agreement. "How quickly can you make this happen?" Ishiro asked. "I need 2 minutes," Ren replied. Ishiro nodded, and immediately the room shook with a tremendous force, causing many in the group to fall down as the lights flickered on and off before stabilizing and coming back on fully once more. "What was that?" Joe asked. "Something big is happening outside," Dr. Chen said. Sure enough, outside, Mechagodzilla had managed to activate a new weapon in its arsenal. The spine began glowing red and generated a tremendous amount of heat, which burned through Mothra's webbing, freeing the Titanic terror. Now on its feet once again, the mecha spun around at top speed as Godzilla charged in and slammed the tip of its tail into Godzilla's jaw, sending him to the ground in a daze. Mothra swooped in and attempted to web the metal beast, but its red breath burned through the webbing attack as it were nothing and struck Mothra in the thorax, sending her flying backward into a building which promptly collapsed on top of her. The heave's engines fired up as Ford took the wheel. "Here we go," he called. The doctors and Gia sat down and buckled the safety belts, and the vehicles was off and flying. Almost immediately after taking off, it had to dodge falling debris from the ceilings before pulling up and flying out above the wreckage above. However, Mechagodzilla spotted the vehicle and began charging its breath. "Dive!" Dr. Lin shouted. Mechagodzilla let fly, and Ford just manages to turn the heave down to avoid the attack and disappear into the buildings below. Mechagodzilla attempted to drag the blast across the horizon, taking all of the buildings in its way and sending hundreds of thousands of tons of debris spewing into the air, which the heave desperately dodged, ducked, dipped, and dove to avoid, while on its way towards the unconscious body of Kong up ahead. "I hope you guys know what you're doing," Ford shouted as the heave narrowly missed being crushed by the falling heli landing pad. As the beam came to a came t- as the beam attack came to an end, Mechagodzilla looked to its left as the rubble began to move. Martha was still on her back underneath it, all with only half of each wing visible to either side. Further to the left, Godzilla was still shaking his head off, trying to clear it off the days he had been put in previously. And as Godzilla began to make it to his feet, Mechagodzilla approached from the back and brought its tail up from its shoulders, and the ends came together to form a sharp point which began spinning rapidly in circle before being slammed into Godzilla's lower back, just above his right hip. The attack sent chunks of flesh and fountains of blood into the air while digging further and further into his body. Godzilla screamed in agony, and the body of Kong stirred. Back in the control room, Ren sat down and checked over his shoulder. His father and others were discussing what they could do to help nearby, and Ren nodded subtly as he glanced over towards his headgear sitting near his feet. Looking back up to the program controlling Mechagodzilla, Ren noticed something in the code which made his head tilt slightly and a small smile appeared on his face. Typing furiously, Ren initiated a program of his own and reached down for the headgear, placed it on his head. Once situated, he felt a hand on his shoulder, and looking up, he saw the face of his father looking at him with a shocked and horrified expression. "What are you doing?" Ishiro asked. Ren gave him a frown and clicked engaged, and immediately his mind was taken elsewhere before he found himself floating in a dark void with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat to keep him company. So now wait, he thought as he relaxed his body and allowed himself to float in darkness. The heave landed next to Kong and Jia was out. And Jia was out the back as soon as it opened. Kneeling down, touching a hand to the ground, she could feel the faint vibration of his frighteningly slow which brought tears to her eyes as she looked up at the massive ape. Feeling a hand on her hand, feeling a hand on her arm, she turned around and signed for Dr. Andrews that his heart was slowing down. "What's she saying now?" Dr. Lin asked. "Kong's dying," Dr. Andrews said. "What can we do?" Ford asked. "Nothing," she said quietly. "So we've just given up?" Ford asked sternly. We can't. We don't have anything that can help a Titan in this condition, Mr. Brody. I don't like it any more than you do, believe me. But what can we do? His heart is slowing down, and the only thing we have is hope that he'll shake it off. No, we have more than that," Dr. Lin said as he glanced at the heave. "What are you talking about, Nathan?" she asked. "I remember Maya said that the heaves individually generated enough power to light up Las Vegas for a week. There's gotta be enough power to jumpstart his heart, right?" "I don't know. We never tested anything like that before. Worth a shot, right?" Dr. Lin asked. "Yeah, for sure. But you know how to overcharge the engine?" Ford asked. "I think so. Can you fly us up to his chest?" "Sure. Let's go," Ford said with a fist pump. Meanwhile, in the darkness, Rand floated in limbo. Occasionally, he would see a subtle yellow glow flickering in the distance, but he disregarded it. He could practically feel the animosity of Ghidorah in the space. It made the air thick and hard to breathe. Even though he knew he wasn't in the space, it felt so real. He could feel the heat and humidity of it all, which made him sweat in his chair. Finally, the program he ran took effect. It was a virus which he designed in the event anything happened to Mechagodzilla's DNA computer, which began breaking down the DNA system control protocols and transferring them to the backdoor control system he had built and to take full manual neural control himself. It was incredibly dangerous. Without the safety measures in place of the DNA computer, there was a real danger of overloading circuitry, frying his brain if any surge came through. But he wouldn't endure. He had to. He had a debt to pay, and he wouldn't stop until it was paid. In the distance, he heard Ghidorah's shriek beginning to rattle one by one, and a smile appeared on his face in the chair. "You have caused enough trouble," he whispered. The cries of the three-headed titan faded as the virus finished its work and broke down the entirety of the DNA's computer control system, which effectively killed Ghidorah as it was all that was left of him. Now in full control, Ren saw Mechagodzilla's feel as if it were his own. He could feel the body, hands, legs, tails, everything. It was as if he had become Mechagodzilla. And faintly, he could hear the shouts of his father echoing softly in the background, begging him to end this and come home. "I lost what was home to me long ago," Ren replied. Sarasava, seeing what Ren saw on the monitor, knew where this was going and shed a silent tear as he gripped his son's shoulders. "Ren," he whispered. Dr. Chan placed a hand on his back and glared at Ren in his seat. "What happens if we pull the headgear?" Joe asked. "It would likely kill him," Dr. Chen replied. Joe immediately took a breath and sighed while nodding in understanding. Meanwhile, the heave landed on Kong's chest and both Ford and Dr. Lin began working together on the control surface before figuring out how to overload the power system. "Okay, as soon as I turn this knob, the heave is going to blow," Dr. Lin said. Ford nodded. "Here we go. Crank. Run!" Both men darted out of the heave at top speed and carefully down Kong's outstretched arm and jumped to the ground below. Dashing behind a nearby building, or what was left of it, they ducked down as the heave exploded, causing Kong's eyes to snap open, and he coughed in pain as he sat up, slowly clutching his chest. Looking ahead, he saw Godzilla on his side, still roaring in agony over the bloody wound in his lower back above the hip. Mothra was still struggling against the debris pile covering her body, and some kind of shiny silver version of Godzilla. Kong shook his head and blinked twice to clear his head and vision, but the shiny silver Godzilla did not go away. It was real. Suddenly, there was a loud clank nearby on the ground, and he looked at it, and he saw the tiny one standing on a mound of rubble look at him. "Are you alright?" she asked. Kong took a breath and winced against the pain of his broken breastbone. The blast had managed to set it properly in place again, but it still burned, and the rest of his ribs ached as well from the battle last night. "It hurts," he replied. Gia pointed to Mechagodzilla as it began stomping towards the original, and lifted a foot and slammed it down onto his side. "That thing is enemy. People made it to kill Godzilla." Kong frowned and looked at Godzilla without pity as Mechagodzilla continued stomping and kicking him down while he was down. Looking back to Gia, he simply huffed through his nose. "Please, Godzilla is not enemy." Kong vaguely remembered the conversation Godzilla had with Mothra before. She had prevented him from continuing to hurt Kong. She was nice. Godzilla agreed to leave him be at the end, but still, did that mean Godzilla was really not an enemy despite all he'd done? Kong looked over at Godzilla and saw him being dragged by the tail and thrown into a set of buildings, and looked back at Gia. "Help him," she pleaded. "Why?" "The metal monster is bad. Godzilla wants to make it go away. He needs help." Kong snarled. "Godzilla always wants to do something bad. Wants something to go away. My friends says Godzilla wants balance. The metal monsters broke the balance. That is why he was angry before. Godzilla is not a bad guy. Kong wanted to argue, but the look in the little one's eyes prevented him from doing so. Beating between her eyes and the image of Godzilla being thrown around by the metal beast in the distance, Kong's heart, wounded as it was, began beating faster. Kong stood up and looked down at Jia, giving the most subtle nod with tight lips, and Jia knew this was likely going to be the last time Kong agreed to listen to her. Approaching a skyscraper that was relatively intact, Kong slammed his dislocated shoulder onto it to pop it back into place. Rolling it was a grimace. He looked at at Mothra, buried beneath the rubble, and immediately dashed over, fighting the brief pain in his chest and began lifting it clear. Piece by piece, he tossed it all aside until he revealed her head. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Kong continued removing debris. Help the Alpha. I can do no more in this fight. If I can fight, so can you. Kong lifted the last massive piece of rubber and threw it aside, fully freeing Mothra, whom he helped flip carefully onto her stomach. Three of her legs were broken. One snapped completely off at the first joint, and her left wing was slightly torn near the middle. With Mothra free, Kong set his sight on the shining metal creature as it once again threw Godzilla into a massive pile of rubble. Shaking his body off the rubble, Godzilla breathed deeply, with his heart beating so fast he feared it would burst. His arms gave out as he tried to push himself to his feet, and he fell to his stomach on the ground with a huff. Mechagodzilla then rolled him onto his back and looked straight into his eyes. We have a debt to pay, Nissan, came a voice through some kind of PA system from the mechanical creature. Mechagodzilla's mouth began glowing red, and Godzilla snarled as his back and eyes began glowing, albeit much more weakly than before. And as Mechagodzilla pulled back his head, Godzilla's eyes snapped open widely as the blue light faded. For the briefest instant, Ren's mind noticed this and froze in confusion. But after an instant, he felt his head wrenched back by the corner of the mouth, and his vision went blue as he looked into the skies above, with his breath attacking harmlessly flying out into the open space. Kong yanked Mechagodzilla's head, having leaped onto its upper back and pulled it around and away from Godzilla, who watched in awe as the wayward Alpha yanked the metal behemoth backward and nearly off its feet entirely before he was scrapped and thrown to the ground. And Godzilla's arm shook violently as he struggled to rise. Mechagodzilla stomped towards Kong and raised its tail high into the air with the intent to drive the tip down into Kong's chest area. Kong tried to push himself up, but the pain in his torso was simply too great to overcome in this moment. His muscles wouldn't work the way he needed them to. But to Kong's own amazement, as the tail came flying down the body of Godzilla, suddenly rushed into his field of view and slammed into the side of Mechagodzilla, knocking it clear off its feet and into the rubble nearby. Godzilla looked down at Kong, and Kong looked at Godzilla. Both were silent for a moment, and as Kong made it to his feet, both of them snarled and glared at Mechagodzilla, who was in the process of getting up with his back to them. What was that? Ren asked. Almost immediately afterward, he felt both arms being grabbed, and he was dragged forward with his head being slammed into and through not one, not two, not three, but four buildings in a row before he was tossed onto his stomach. How? He yelled. Rolling onto his side and looking quickly over his shoulder, he saw two silhouettes outlined against the sun. One was clearly Godzilla, but the other, no. Kong's head blocked the sun, and Ren got his first good look at the ape titan as he roared down at Ren alongside Godzilla. In his chair, his jaw clenched and his teeth started to grind. Ishiro kept a hand on his son's shoulder as he watched the monitor and hung his head. "It'll be okay, Sarasawa," Dr. Chen whispered. "I hope you're right," he replied softly. Red rose rapidly and faced the two combatants standing side by side. Beware tails." Kong glanced to Godzilla's side and saw the blood dripping to the side. "Thank you." Godzilla nodded. "Since when did these two get along?" Ren growled. Ren began powering up his breath, and Kong immediately rushed in and reached up with his right hand to clamp the mechanical menace's mouth shut, while his left hand held the arm back. Godzilla rushed ahead as well and stopped the two other arms and used his breath to blast the attack when it came up and around in an attempt to stab at Kong. And try as he might, Ran couldn't get the tail to push through the attack. Backing off his own breath attack, Ran diverted power to his arm and pushed forward, which yanked both Kong and Godzilla off their feet and threw them backwards. Kong managed to stay on his feet while Godzilla fell to the ground. The mechanical beast's head turned towards Godzilla, and Kong wasted no time in sliding over in between the two with both hands up and ready to brawl. "Get out of my way!" Mechagodzilla spun around, whipping its tail towards Kong, who ducked beneath it and jumped forward with both feet slamming them to Mechagodzilla's side, sending it sprawling to the ground. Kong, meanwhile, hit the ground, clutching his chest again and growling weakly. Godzilla, having made it to his feet, walked up behind Kong and helped lift him up as Mechagodzilla recovered from the blow. Ren's hand on the arms of his chair clenched tightly. This can't be happening. How can they be holding so well against the mecha? The sight of two standing side by side against them made his heart burn. It was almost like a flash of a time long past from his youth entered his mind. Ren clearly visible and a taller figure shrouded in darkness, but the silhouette was familiar. Too familiar. It could be no one else. A tear fell from Ren's left eye in the chair, and Mechagodzilla used the back of its left forearm to wipe its eyes. "No, that time is lost, and I'll never get it back." Again, Mechagodzilla's attention turned to Godzilla, and its body tensed up. "And it's all your fault, son. It's all your fault." Mechagodzilla suddenly burst into a sprint and slammed its head into Godzilla's chest, throwing them both backward with Mechagodzilla landing on top his counterpart. Pushing himself up and sitting on Godzilla's chest, it brought both hands up and began relentlessly punching Godzilla's head. Left, right, left, right. Kong tried to rush Mechagodzilla, but that tail whipped up and slammed into his chest, sending a massive, tremendous wave of pain shooting through his whole body. Kong went down, grasping his chest and struggling to breathe as he felt the two sides of his breastbone were knocked out of place and grinding against one another. Now unopposed, Mechagodzilla continued to splat. Webbing suddenly blinded the mecha, who began attempting to scrape it away as something strange began to happen. In his mind, Ren could hear music, ancient, tribal, calming. What's happening? Mothra hovered behind Mechagodzilla above his head, with her wings glowing brightly, even against the light of the sun behind her. She refused to attack further. And Godzilla, despite not knowing what was happening and wanting to attack, held still. The music continued in his mind, and Rand was flooded with memories of a time long gone by. Him, his mother, and Ishiro. Before his obsession overcame him, Ishiro was with him constantly. They played together. They joked together. They did Rand's homework together. Why? Rand asked. Why is this happening? He repeated. Tears ran free and dripped from his chin to his lap while his father cried with him. He could see them. He could see Rand's memory on the monitor. Their time together. Their bond as a father and son before the obsession, before the loss of his wife. Rand's mother. Before all of this madness, anger, and hatred. It was all laid bare on the screen for the entire team to see. Rand snarled. Get out of my head! Mechagodzilla stood up and turned around, preparing to blast Mothra with his red breath, but Godzilla let fly first into the back of the mecha's head, sending it sprawling to the ground, just as Kong managed to fix the misalignment in his breastbone and make it to his feet. What's happening? Godzilla demanded. It's controlled by another. Someone who suffers in pain and confusion. Someone who has lost their way. I try to show them the truth. The, their heart denies. But they resist. Yes, I know what more we can do for them. I do. Mothra and, Mothra and Godzilla both looked at Godzilla, who had stumbled upon the axe and held it in his right hand. We defeat them. Godzilla nodded, and the three of them all looked to Mechagodzilla as it stood up with its back to them, hunching forward and trembling. Mothra could feel the rage building within the heart of whomever controlled it, and her own heart wept for them. Forgive us, wayward one. For your sake, you must fall. Godzilla roared loudly to get the mecha's attention, and as it spun around to face him, it was greeted by the sight of Mothra streaking towards it. Bringing its hand up to protect itself, it tried to grip her wings, only for her to divert at the last moment and reveal Kong, who had been hiding behind her and raising his axe high above his head and slamming it down into the mecha's arm. The attack left deep cuts in the metal, but they were still intact and still functional. Mechagodzilla came forward to grip Kong's axe handle, but Kong turned his body to shield the axe from its grip as Godzilla charged into the mecha with his shoulders out. Mechagodzilla hit the ground once more and fought to rise itself as both Godzilla and Kong looked at the axe. The two nodded to one another, and Godzilla charged his breath and unleashed it into the axe as Kong held firm. The axe began to glow and flashed brilliantly before Godzilla's attack came to an end. Now fully empowered, Kong lifted the axe and roared as he charged Mechagodzilla, who had just made it to its feet. Turning and looking around, Ren's vision saw only Kong on the axe as it came down into his left shoulder. Luckily, since it was a mecha, there was no nerves to feel pain. Otherwise, Rand was certain this blow would have ended his life if it were actually him taking it. Nevertheless, he could feel the metal tearing and splitting, and the wiring to the left arm went cold as he could no longer move the arm at all. Kong pulled back on the axe and raised it once more before slamming it into the same area on a flat angle, which took the left arm completely off. Ren tried to turn and use the mecha's tail, but Kong swiftly brought the axe down and lopped it off near the base with one powerful swing. Now, down an arm and the tail, Ren swung around, trying to reach for Kong's head, only to be met by Godzilla's claws, holding it back. Looking at Kong too late, Ren could only watch in semi-slow motion as Kong brought the axe around and lopped off the head of the mechanical menace. Ren's vision fell with the head, and he lost all sensation in the rest of the Mechagodzilla's body before the vision in the head faded into nothing. Kong, meanwhile, held the head up and roared in victory as, as Godzilla let go of the body and Mothra landed on a building nearby. All three collapsed in exhaustion, and Kong dropped the axe as he leaned back against the building. Back in the control room, Ren's headgear malfunctioned and gave him quite a shock before his natural vision returned, and he, along with his father, pulled the headgear off. Ishiro lowered him out of the chair and laid him on his back on the ground, cradling his head as he held him closer. Ren. Ren's eyes fluttered. What happened? Ishiro stroked his head. It's over, son. Ren chuckled. So Nissan defeated me again. Ishiro shook his head. No, Ren. Gojira never defeated you. I I lost focus on what in my life truly mattered. Ren frowned. What does that mean? Sarasawa pulled him into a gentle hug. I neglected you. Both of you. I let my fascination with Gojira cloud my priorities and I neglected you both. Forgive me. How can I? You didn't even come to her funeral. Ishiro nodded. I know. Then how? Ren asked while using what little strength he had to push away from Ishiro. How can you ask me to forgive you after everything you put us through? Ishiro's heart sank, and he hung his head with a subtle nod. If you cannot forgive me, I understand. Ren slowly pushed himself up to a seated position. It's not that I can't forgive you. It's that I won't forgive you. I Ren froze as he once again heard the gentle ancient tribal music coursing through him, and like before, he naturally was reminded of the better time when he was a young and his father and he shared a genuine bond. He remembered back then that he was always looked up to his father and wanted to be like him. But after what happened with Gojira now, uh, how? The music intensified, and Ren's negative thoughts was pushed out of his mind. All he could remember were the good times, the smiles, the laughs, the love. Ren slowly looked down as silent tears dripped from his eyes once again. Wiping them clear, he looked up at his father and they shared a long moment of silence before Ren finally spoke up. It's too late to change what happened. I won't forgive you. Won't forgive what you did back then, he said as he stood up. And much to Ishiro's surprise, Ren offered him a hand. But I will accept the way the things are now. Gojira is a life passion, and it's who you are to study him and the Titans. I can finally accept that much. At least. Ishiro smiled and shook his son's hand, standing to full height and sharing a handshake with a nod. Thank you, son. Ren nodded once and turned away. I suppose I have a lot of answer for when Monarch comes to apprehend me. Ishiro shook his head, showing a son. They will not question my son being part of my team. Ren glanced over his shoulder, but Godzilla's roar in the distance got the team's attention, and they all rushed to the area where the Heaves first landed. Kong, Godzilla, and Mothra were all visible, with the destroyed body of Mechagodzilla lying nearby. Part of Ren's heart ached as he looked at the mecha, and the part of his heart still burned as he looked at Godzilla. But for the first time, as he gazed at the mighty Alpha Titan, he didn't feel or see a sense of competition or bitterness. Rather, he felt at ease. The struggle was finally over. He could relax now. He could accept Gojira as the Alpha Titan, not his big brother, not a rival for his father's attention, just as Gojira. Speaking of, Godzilla, having made it back to his feet after the breather and walking over to check on Mafra, looked at Kong and gave him a nod. You have more than earned your place, wayward Alpha. My home is the sea. Her home is the skies. The land shall be yours, wherever you tread. Help me keep the balance, and our kin shall live in peace alongside us. Kong forced himself to his feet with a grunt of pain and looked at Godzilla. To live in peace is all I ever wished for, and wherever I dwell, I shall keep the peace as I did on my island. Godzilla nodded, and he turned around and began heading towards the sea. Mothra leaped into the air and hovered near Kong. Farewell, wayward one. May your journey to your new home be a safe one, and may you live in happiness forevermore. She then turned and flew off into the sky before disappearing into the horizon. Kong huffed with a nod of approval and glanced once more at the axe. Picking it up and holding it, he looked at Godzilla, who slid into the ocean and disappeared beneath the waves. I shall return this to its resting place, and may I never again have need of it against you or anyone else. Kong turned towards the hole Godzilla had punched in the earth to the hollow earth and began walking towards it. Several weeks later, Dr. Andrews and Len, along with Gia, checked on the new base as it was being put together in the hollow earth. Everything looking good, Nathan. Gia sighed. Yep, all's good here. Gia sighed. Good. And Dr. Andrews smiled and ruffled Gia's hair. Just then, Kong let it in their view and turned to look at them with a big and content smile on his face. Gia matched his smile and waved to him, and Kong rushed out into the world, freely climbing, jumping, crawling, swimming, and observing to his heart's content. With his chest having healed, he beat freely once more, with a proud roar of satisfaction that echoed through the entire Hollow Earth landscape. However, deep in the Hollow Earth's core, not far from where Kong found the throne's room, a powerful presence began to stir. The ground rumbled, and hundreds of smaller creatures took wing or ran from the epicenter of the tremor. The ground outside the throne cracked, and a hiss of steam rose from within. Deep down in the darkness, a pair of gleaming golden eyes flared to life as a massive vine erupted from the crevices with a small carnivorous mouth at the end of it, which unleashed a high-pitched shriek of a roar.